Bartleby, or as Only When I Can, as my Twitter handle. I have been running the Chapbook Festival, which is a self-published blog of philosophy, cultural criticism, poetry, and various other sort of interdisciplinary things since 2003. I recently collaborated with Douglas Wright, who is here somewhere, and a number of other creatives from a number of different disciplines to form Exit Strata, which is a creative collective and sort of cultural organization, which has a teaching component, a workshop component, and also a very active community-run website and a literary magazine which focuses on collaboratively created content. Today I'm here at the Chapbook Festival promoting two of my own personal handmade poetry chapbooks. A chapbook is a small, usually handmade book of work from one or more persons. In this case, I've taken two different books. They're both poetry from around 2007 to the present. They're arranged around sort of meta-heuristic themes as opposed to as being chosen based on content that works together. This one was chosen on the basis of the word ground and its three different meanings, there being a verb tense, a noun, and also an adjective. So starting with the idea of language as the ground, the noun, the ground of writing, and sort of the materia of writing, moving towards the state of being ground, which you can see here. So you have all the different, you have the different definitions here. So the state of being ground, chopped or crushed, right? So that's going to be sort of like what poetry does to you, or the state that you can often be in when you're writing poetry is the state of being ground, followed by the last, which is going to be the verb ground, sort of the idea of being fixed or being grounded, and again using poetry either as something that would ground you or as something that you write in a different way when you feel thus grounded. So this one divides the poetic work that I've done into those three categories. The other is sort of a little more playful. So you have here sort of a dendrite tree sort of image, and I'm playing with the idea of like an atlas or mapping or geography in terms of both metaphor and real. These poems have been organized and selected based on their tendency towards geographical or physical description, using either place-based metaphor or actually descriptions of physical locations. I've also given longitudinal and latitudinal information for each poem, so the actual location of the writing can be seen by the reader, both in these poems as well as in some of the other sort of more art book or conceptual projects that I've brought here. A lot of what I'm trying to do and a lot of what I think that we're trying to sort of encourage in community is to think about how we can, by creating physical manifestations of poetic work, which is in essence a challenge to institutional language structure, institutional sentence structure, and a challenge to the reliance on a certain type of sounding logic to produce information that is provable or empirical, returning to a place of pure subjectivity and ownership. So like in this piece, what you see is me experimenting with research and how it can be documented using a poetic model, also playing with the proprioceptic relationship between, proprioceptic has to do with muscle memory and muscle experience and muscle perception and your awareness of yourself in space. So what I've done here is I've insisted that the reader have a proprioceptic experience in which they're always aware of the author, because there are because the text itself, in terms of the physicality of the text and in terms of the inclusion of error continues to locate the reader in the physical space, both of the document as a created thing and not as a priori information, insisting that the reader return to an understanding of authorship and subjectivity. So I think what I'm trying to play with a lot of my work, and what we're trying to sort of play with in the collective, and what a lot of the people here are working with, is sort of like trying to think about new forms of text and new forms of inquiry and new forms of publication, and how we can challenge the norm using things that are traditionally thought of as purely artistic or creative practices, and understanding those practices as actually the most radical and the most progressive and the most avant-garde in terms of forcing the subject to take full responsibility for a unique and personalized logic, moving away from any sort of reliance or allowance for an ontological basis for your claims. So I think that we're trying to encourage each other here at the Chapbook Festival in our efforts and in our sort of shared interests and our shared media, trying to see, instead of being competitive with each other, I think we're really encouraging each other to learn from the practices that we have learned from the practices that we do, whether we do them more technically or more digitally. There's a lot of sharing going on of institutional knowledge for people who are already nonprofits or larger cultural organizations or teaching institutions or more established presses. There's a lot of sort of mentorship and open sharing with younger presses, and also in the other direction, a lot of the younger people and people who are doing more DIY or crowdfunding are sharing with the more set in their ways institutions how to understand open source material and open source culture and sort of the new ways of interacting that are more of the digital age. And you can see that I'm starting to play with that in the inclusion of, sort of the QR code, both in the colophon, which is where you sort of give the information about the book, but also actually within the text of the book. And I'm playing with this in different ways. In this case, I've started to include what's, I guess, known as like augmented reality for a textual experience, in which you actually can scan a QR code to find out more information about the forms that are being used. In this case, a terzarima and a triole, which are very formal poetic structures. So playing with how we can access our augmented and hyper reality, even as we're really going back to very traditional forms. There's a lot of amazing energy here, and I think that it's great for people outside the poetic and printing community to see what amazing work is happening here, and try to understand the role of it in a larger cultural frame.